Hello and welcome to the channel, Dynasty Christ. Today's video I'm going to be explaining how Jesus was a heretic and why that was a good thing. Now, one thing I realize is when I do some of my videos, a lot of Christians will come on and say, how can you say that? That's completely heretical and it goes against the word of God. And I find it kind of ironic that Christians don't understand that Jesus Christ was probably the most heretical person in history. And that is obviously a good thing. Now, the reason I say this is another thing I was studying was slavery in the Bible. And there is a verse that says something along the lines of, if you have a slave and you whack it with a rod and you kill them, you're to be punished. But if they survive, you're not to be punished. And when I read it, I think that's what a load of nonsense. You know, slavery is completely wrong. Now, obviously, the Bible thumpers would say, oh, you can't say that. That contradicts the word of God. So they're on the side of slavery. I'm on the side of saying slavery and hitting your slave is a load of rubbish. And the interesting thing I found is literally just a couple of verses later, the Bible, the original Old Testament, was saying that, you know, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And what's interesting is Jesus said, you have heard it say, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I say, love your enemies, etc., etc. So Jesus contradicted the word of God. So when you criticize me, Christians lack the understanding that Jesus did exactly the same thing on multiple occasions. You know, think of the adulterous woman who they wanted to stone. Jesus Christ said, no, who is without sin, cast the first stone. So he exposed them. He went against the word of God. And there's multiple occasions. It was actually a reason Jesus was put to death, because they called him a blasphemer. He was going against the word of God. He healed on the Sabbath. You know, again, he went against the religious traditions. So when people and Christians accuse me of going against Christianity, well, you have the same problem with Jesus. And that's why when you're born again in the Spirit of Christ, you gain spiritual understanding rather than going by the written word of God. You go by the living word of God. So if I read passages about slavery or whatever it is, if it goes against the living word of God in my spirit and conscience, and something in my intuition is telling me something's off, I'll go by that rather than the written word of God 2,000 years ago by people who lived a completely different life that contradicts our modern day lives. And that's the ultimate blessing of Jesus Christ, that he freed us from religious doctrine. And that even though there is a lot of truth in the Bible, no one can deny that. But there are some things that are troubling and that do not make any sense. And that's the beautiful thing that Christ came. You know, Christ came and said, well, this doesn't make any sense anymore. This is the new law I'm given. And we should always be evolving. People should always constantly be being born again. And we should always be evolving. Just like in the medical community, in the last 2,000 years, we should always be evolving to get better medical procedures. But how come when it comes to religion, we just go by the same old rubbish? And especially like in Islam, they say it's the perfect word of God for all of eternity. So all the crazy stuff in the Quran, they say is still relevant today. That's why they can say, well, I can have 10 wives and marry adolescents and all this stuff, because that's what they did back then, when obviously things should be changed. And to be fair, in Islam, a lot of the you're not seeing much child marriage in modern day Islam, even though it still does go ahead. And the sad thing is that they use their religious scriptures to justify it. And also with a lot of terrorism and violence, when you're seeing it's based on religious teachings from before, it's hard to say, well, they're kind of wrong. And that's why Muslims are in some ways correct to criticize Christians, because how can the Christians say that the Muslim stuff is violent and all this stuff when the Old Testament was exactly the same? It was also violent and had a lot of dangerous teachings in it, what we would consider today, such as leaving a religion. You know, apostates should be killed in Islam, they believe, and the Christians will say, oh, that's terrible, but then that's what used to happen in the Old Testament. So you can't really criticize the Muslims when it happened in Christianity or in the Old Testament as well. But obviously this is why we follow Christ, because Christ reveals to us that it's no longer relevant, and it probably shouldn't have been relevant at all in the first place. Okay, so that's the main point of my video today, to say that if you're a Christian and you're criticizing me for going against the word of God, just understand that it's exactly the same thing that Jesus Christ did. And you have to ask yourself, if you believe that Jesus Christ is coming back, let's say that Jesus Christ comes back and he's contradicting the word of God again, are you going to be one of those ones saying, no, free Barabbas and kill Jesus? I most likely think Christians and the Muslims would be the ones asking for Jesus to be killed again, whereas people like myself would be saying, "No, this guy's the truth. He's bringing the truth." But unfortunately, the religious people would still persecute him, and followers of Christ, disciples of Christ, would know the truth, but we'd probably get bullied by the majority religious people. So asking everybody to wake up, come to Christ rather than religion. If you like the video, like it, comment below, all the usual stuff, and God bless everyone. Goodbye.